Alright, in this video I'm going to show you how to take an image in Photoshop. So this is a goofy image of myself, and I'm going to convert that into a kind of a very graphic black and white image that I can pull into Illustrator and use the image trace tool to create some nice vectors for it. So what I've done so far to prep this in Photoshop is I've isolated the figure from the background. And so you can see I've done that here with the mask on this layer. It makes it really easy to select because I don't have any hair. So I can do that. So the next thing I'm going to do is kind of reduce the detail on this image. So I find that the threshold tool in Photoshop is the best way to do this in conjunction with a blur. And what that will do is reduce the detail, and then when we drag that item into Illustrator, it will use the Pathfinder, not the Pathfinder, but the image trace tool will do a better job of tracing this image. And so let me show you what we can do with that. And you can get a rough preview in Photoshop how this works. So first thing I'm going to do is create a threshold. That's right here under the adjustment layers. Here you can do a threshold, and what that does here, when I click that on, you can see that it gives me an option of kind of controlling those tones. So we'll show you how that works. But what works better with this is I want to reduce the detail. So I'm just going to drag my layer 0 here to copy it. So I'm going to drag it here on the little paper icon. And what I'm going to do now is, with the image selected, if you've got a mask, but you notice those little brackets are on the image, I'm going to go to Filter and Blur. Okay, and sometimes this is great to actually turn on the threshold first, but I'm going to just show you what it does here. So if I blur this, you'll notice as I zoom in, it starts to kind of blur the image. In some cases more or less. So what I want to do is I'm going to turn off this bottom layer because that one's going to remain sharp. This is if I need to ever go back to the others. So, but I'm going to leave the threshold on, and I'm going to go back to that filter. So again, it's under Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and you can see what happens when I start to increase the level of blur. See how it starts to posterize this and turn it into a lot more graphic? So you can kind of see how that's working. So it's just kind of softening those edges. You can see it's kind of eliminating some of that. And the idea is that, you know, how much blur can I throw on it before it starts to lose all legibility? And it's just this idea of kind of using a slider, which I really like, to simplify the image. So you can kind of see how that works. All right, so I'm going to just start with maybe, well, let's do 9 just to see how that does. And I'm going to hit OK. So now what I can do is go back to my threshold. And this is interesting because as you slide this, it might compress or choke some of that detail. You can see how it brings more detail into that or not. So another way that we can mess with that too is adding another adjustment layer of like a levels or curves. I'm actually going to put this underneath the threshold, but you'll notice as I mess with the tones here, I can target particular tones. So if I want to block up the shadows but blow out the highlights, you can see that it might tweak that a little bit more, so you can kind of really reduce that. And in some cases I may want to just leave this on the blur, go in here with my a brush tool and paint on that and just kind of eliminate some of these points. Okay, but you can see how that's reduced the detail of everything. Okay, so it's really simplified those fundamental shapes. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the threshold, curves, and layer 0, select all those by selecting those 3 with Shift. And then on the layers palette, I'm going to merge those layers. So Command E. So it merges that into one image. Okay, so I already have Illustrator open. You can see that here. I'm going to make a new document and kind of move that to the side and then open this up here. So, and then what I'm going to do here is if I have my layers palette open, I'm going to pull this over so you can see it a little bit. One of the best ways to do this, we can just use our move tool, and I'm going to grab this image, and it's going to be this threshold layer, so make sure you're selected there. I'm just going to drag it and drop it onto my Illustrator, and you can see that that will kind of import that. Now we could also save this image and then go to File and Place if we wanted, but I just like that drag and drop because it's simple. And so this comes in as a raster file. And you can see that it has a bounding box, so I can actually change its size. Now if I increase the size, it's going to pixelate it. You see as I get bigger, and it'll start to make this edge a little bit fuzzier. But what I want to do is convert this to a vector. So what it's going to do is it's going to go in and draw all these shapes for me, because I do not want to trace that with the pen tool. I am way too lazy for that. Plus they have a good job of doing this itself. So you'll notice that when I select this object and it comes in as layer, you can see it's a kind of gives a weird name, but that's because we dropped it in. But it's a raster image. You can see that it tells you what kind of file it is. It's a TIFF file. It's transparent, RGB, color space, at 300 pixels per inch, which are based on some of those settings here in terms of image size. You can see it's 300, etc. So that's where it gets those. So what we're going to do is we're going to do image trace. You can see that that comes up here, but let me show you the more detail under the image trace palette, and that is right here, image trace. And so this palette comes up, and we're going to show you the advanced options here. And so with this selected, we have a couple of options. So we can change its, do grayscale or color. We can do different types of presets. They have ones that are high fidelity, different types of colors. So, but the main one I want to do is what I call ignore white. And this is a warning. Sometimes really high resolution files might take a lot of more time and create a lot of different vector shapes and points, which if you get thousands and thousands of these points, it might bog down your system, but we'll be okay on this one. So I'm just going to hit OK. And what it does is it gives us a preview. So you can kind of see what's happened here is it's previewed, and it's pretty close. We can adjust the threshold on it, and this might be a lot more apparent depending on what type of image you got. We may increase some of that line quality here or there. So you can see how that threshold maybe eliminates some of that. I may not want to have that completely there. Maybe just a little bit of a line. So you can kind of fine-tune that. You can control, excuse me, you can control the noise in the corners, and that might adjust kind of what kind of points it's making, depending on what kind of image you've got. Okay, so that can be something that you mess with. Ignore white. What that's going to do is it's going to ignore all these shapes and just basically make those transparent. So in some cases you may want that to actually make white shapes and black shapes that are kind of connected. In this case, the method is creating a black shape with white shapes cut out of it. And if this is the method that we want, we can eliminate that. And what it's going to do is create a big black shape and then white shapes on top of it. So it's automatically kind of creating a pathfinder for us, depending on how you want that to work. And you'll kind of get a feel for it as you go. So I just want to do that ignore white, and we're going to do this fill. And then again, that gives us a preview of kind of what it is. And you can see it's almost exactly the same as what I did in Photoshop. It's cleaned up this edge. As you can see here, it's a little bit blurry, so it's tightened that up. So I'm just going to hit OK now. So to do that, we unclick the preview option, and by doing so, that opens the trace option here, and that's going to trace it. And you'll notice now I select this, it still says, oh, it's still a vector, or it's kind of a mix. It's a tracing result, but I can't edit any of those points. So to do that, I have to select it and hit expand. So as soon as I do this, you'll notice it turned those all into vectors. So now I could go in here and they're just shapes. So if I wanted to change the shapes, and you can see how that's transparent, so it's just one big black shape that's all grouped together, but I can scale that up and down, and I have a nice little portrait of myself. So let's say I want, oh, I don't want this little line. I can again go, because it's all connected, and you'll notice when I select it under this, it's grouped of a whole bunch of different shapes. Okay, so like all of these little individual shapes are all grouped together. So I need the direct selection tool just to select the part of the group, and I can just delete those, maybe those points. I could alter certain things if I wanted to, if I wanted to smooth things out or eliminate certain things. You can see that I can kind of delete those, or maybe alter it. Maybe this needs to be, again, minus certain points. So you can see how that minus pen tool, you can see how that delete anchors points. So maybe I just want to take out some of these. So a lot of times this needs a little bit of refining as you go through that, but for the most part it does a pretty good job right off the bat. So the other things that we can do with this is maybe to simplify it. So in some cases you can see how many points that it's drawn across this little shoulder. I may want to simplify that, and there's a couple of different ways to do that, and I'll show you that in